This occurred when I was 18 and backpacking my way through the world. I always looked a few years younger than my actual age and often had problems getting into places. I often find myself hissing, "No, really, I'm an adult," to people who refuse to believe the numbers stated in my ID card. I arrived in West Australia in January in a little town that looks nothing like the brightly coloured postcard world that I left behind in Sydney. I had rented a car and was getting used to the Aussie way of driving and didn't pay attention to the fact that I was running out of fuel. So, naturally, the car suddenly gave up with a whimper and came to a halt. I wasn't that worried since I had a spare tank in the trunk. I had problems getting the lid off though. No matter how hard I pulled, it didn't give in. So I started walking back to the little cluster of shops I had spotted earlier. I was greeted by a man on an ATV-ish thing sitting outside a shop. He nodded in the direction of road and said, "Problem with the car, missy?" I must have looked puzzled because he smiled and said, "No one comes walking in here from that direction. There's nothing out there." I explained my situation and he listened sympathetically. "Did you rent the car from Creepy Freddy? No wonder he gave up on you. That bloke can't be trusted, you see." He introduced himself as Charlie and quickly got the lid off the spare tank for me. "Want to ride back to the car? It's awfully warm to walk in the middle of the day. No ozone layer here, you see." I felt a bit stupid hesitating. He seems like a nice guy and he was right. The sun was terrible. My shoulders already burnt despite the sun protection. He must have sensed my hesitation because he put a hand on my shoulder and smiled. "I'm not the boogeyman, I promise you. I just don't want anyone walking in this weather. I would have offered you a ride if you were a 40-year-old bloke too. Here, you take the helmet. My head isn't worth protecting anyway." And so I got up on the back of his ATV, the spare petrol tank in front of me and a somewhat uneasy feeling in my stomach. "Just tap my shoulder if you want me to slow down, alright?" He drove the short distance to my car, but he didn't slow down. I tapped his shoulder. I tapped again. He drove straight past it. In the rearview mirror I could see him grin as he sped up. I couldn't jump. The speed was simply too high and he probably would have killed me. And I had no idea where he was taking me, but I felt certain his intentions were evil. This continued for at least 30 terrifying minutes until I could see a little rest stop, clearly made for people to stop and enjoy the view. As we approached the rest stop, I saw my chance and grabbed hold of his throat and with both hands, squeezing as hard as I could. I felt him struggle to keep the vehicle on the road while fighting for air, and as we came up alongside the rest stop, he had no choice but to stop. I threw myself off, tossing the helmet and screaming loudly enough to wake the dead. There was a truck there, but no person in view. However, only a moment later the door to the loo opened and a terrifying man with a beard and proportions like a grizzly demanded to know what the hell was happening. I pointed to the abductor and cried that he tried to kidnap me and the grizzly man tried to grab hold of the abductor but wasn't fast enough. Soon, he was gone. The grizzly man turned out to be really nice and he phoned the police for me and waited with me until they got there. Since that day, I don't judge by appearance. Charlie was a nice looking bloke, charming and always smiling and seemed to have good intentions, while grizzly man George looks like he had just been awakened from his ancient lair, but was a really nice guy. I later made my way back home with many stories to tell and lots of memories, but this one is by far the creepiest. I grew up in a relatively small town in northwest Ohio with a population of around 20,000. A typical summer day for me at age 12 involved waking up early and eating as much Crispix cereal as I could in a short amount of time, getting on my bike, then leaving my house and not returning until dark. Being the youngest of 3 boys, I had 2 brothers who were 4 and 6 years older than me. The easiest way to avoid their torments was not to be there. It was towards the end of summer and I remember having plans to go fishing with a friend that morning. I was up early and did my usual routine before heading out to meet up with him so that maybe we could catch some shitty carp or old boots from the bank of the muddy river that ran through town. It wasn't really my thing, but at least it was something to do and gave me a reason to be out of the house early enough to avoid possibly taking a beating from one of my older brothers. The fastest way for me to ride to my friend's house involved cutting through a drive that led to the deserted Daughters of America home, or D of A, as everyone called it. The place terrified me my entire childhood to the point of having a reoccurring nightmare about it. There was about a 300-yard driveway with a cast iron gate overhead that led directly to the front of the building with large enclosed fields on either side of it. It had been abandoned or unused as long as I could remember, and although someone cut the grass a few times a year, the trees and foliage were all overgrown and unkept. The building itself seemed to be in pretty good shape, but the whole place just scared me, and every time I pedaled past the building on the lane that cut around its left-hand side, I always had that feeling of being watched. After fishing for a few hours, my friend and I both got a little bored, packed our stuff and headed to my house. We passed through the D of A grounds on our way back, and I was a little freaked out going through it as always. When we got to my house, we threw our fishing poles in the garage, grabbed a couple of Cokes from the refrigerator and a basketball from the shelf, before then heading the opposite way we had just come from to the park that was nearby. We played basketball for a while with a bunch of older guys, but I think my friend felt about basketball the way I felt about fishing, so he took off after a few games. I kept playing until late afternoon when the game had dwindled down to just a few guys and eventually everyone was leaving. There were still several hours until it would be dark, so I was trying to think of what I was going to do next when Mike struck up a conversation with me. I kind of knew Mike, but really only from playing basketball at the park. All I really knew about him was that he was a few years older than me and sucked at basketball. He was skinny with shoulder-length sandy blonde hair and was a little over 6 feet with little to no coordination. He was definitely a little weird too, but when he got around to asking me if I wanted to go for a ride on our bikes together, I couldn't think of anything better to do, so I agreed. We ended up back down by the river, and I remember he showed me a cool little spot that I hadn't known about where you could cross a washed out drive onto a little island in the middle of the road. Then we headed just down the street from there, where he introduced me to an even older guy named Bill, who was in his late 30s or early 40s and was sitting on the porch of a rundown house. He was kind of a rough looking guy, about 6 feet tall with a stubble and black hair that had grey creeping into it from the sides, where it came down over his ears in a 70s sort of style. We all talked for a bit before the two of them went inside while I sat on the porch. I could hear them talking through the screen door, but couldn't make out exactly what they were saying since they seemed to be using a hushed kind of tone, not whispering but not talking at a normal volume either. I heard a third man's voice say something about leaving, and eventually they came back outside and somehow it was decided that we would all go for a bike ride. So now I'm riding my bike through downtown with two dudes I don't really know and don't really like. I remember thinking that the whole situation was just off in some way. After stopping at a store and them buying me candy and a pop, we were riding again. It was getting close to sunset, so I finally spoke up and said that I would have to go home soon. Bill tells me there is one last place we have to go and to follow him, so I did. We weaved through town and slowly but surely I realized we were making our way down to the goddamn D of A. We ride up to the side of the building from the back and around to the front where Bill stops. I'm terrified, but I don't show or say anything because I'm an idiot kid trying to act tough. Bill is in front of me and Mike is behind. Bill gets off his bike and starts telling me something about how cool the building is and how he's always wanted to go inside, and that he thought we could all go in together if we can find a way. All I'm thinking at this point is, hell no. Mike is off his bike now too, and they both push their bikes off to the side of the steps leading up to the front door. I'm still straddling my bike with my feet on the ground as they proceed to try to open the front door. It's locked. Bill looks back at me, urging me to come on and say something about needing help. I get off my bike and lay it down on its side directly in front of the front door at the base of the steps. I'm standing at the base of the steps as Mike and Bill try to open a French door to the left of the main door. It won't open either. Then they tried the other French door on the right hand side and it pops right open. Then they try to motion for me to come up to the now open door, but I don't move. I just shake my head. They both then start walking down the steps telling me I have to go in with them and that it would be cool and some other bullshit. I say I need to go home and turn around to pick up my bike.
Right as I turn around, Bill grabs my right arm with his right hand hard. I snap my head around to see Mike coming around in front of me. I try to pull my arm free, but Mike grabs my left arm. I start pulling away from Mike, but then Bill grabs my left arm with his left hand. I'm screaming at this point as Bill has both my arms just above my elbows. Mike starts to go for my feet, but I start kicking. I pull back so my weight is supported by Bill, who has both my arms and is trying to drag me, and I kick Mike with both my feet right in his nose and he drops, shrieking. I then start trying to stomp Bill's feet and headbutt him with the back of my head. I manage to get my left arm free and start twisting my entire body around until my right arm pops loose from his grip. I shove Mike as hard as I can and reach for my bike. Mike is coming towards me. I still have the basketball wedged in the frame of my bike from earlier, and I throw it at him. It hits him in the hand he was covering his now bleeding nose with, and it stops him for a second. I take off. I don't look back at all. I just pedaled as hard and as fast as I could straight back to my house. From the door of the D of A to my house was maybe 1,000 yards, so it wasn't too far. The garage door is open and my dad is inside. I ride right inside with a huge sense of relief, but I'm shaking. My dad is behind his workbench and says hello, but he's preoccupied with whatever he's doing, so he doesn't notice that I'm pretty much freaking out. I stare out of the garage door, waiting to see if either of those guys are coming, but they never do. I looked back at my dad as I tried to calm down a bit. He's running a table saw, so he never really gives me another look. I go inside the house and nobody else is home, so I head straight to my room and kind of huff and puff for quite a while before I start to feel somewhat normal again, as my heart finally slows down. I think it was embarrassment and part of me not really understanding what exactly happened that kept me from saying anything. I never told anyone in my family or any of my friends about it. I honestly don't remember dwelling on it at all much after that. Just as I was about to graduate high school about 6 years after all that went down, I had an assignment to write about the story of my hometown. While I was researching that paper, one of the things I looked into was the Daughters of America Home. I not only looked into the history of the organization, but I obviously wanted to know the specific building in my town that had terrified me since forever. Around that time, someone had bought the property and they were in the process of building condos and turning it into a par 3 golf course. There were lots of recent newspaper articles about the new development, and so I just started working my way back in time from the present, finding everything I could about the place. Then, I found a newspaper article that was about 6 years old and almost shit my pants. 3 guys had been arrested for squatting on the property about 6 months after my whole ordeal. Mike, Bill, and a third person I didn't recognize that may have been the voice I heard from inside the house that day. They had kidnapped a mentally handicapped boy and were keeping him there too. There was and still is a large state mental hospital in my town, and apparently one of them worked there and just disappeared with this kid. The article didn't go into much detail that I remember, but it mentioned that they had apparently been in the building possibly for years before this. Mike was actually 22 at the time. Bill was 45 and the third guy was somewhere in his 50s, I think. Here are some pictures I found of the D of A looking way less creepy than how I knew it.
I've had many weird experiences and encounters in my life. I read these stories all the time from brave people who shared, so I decided to share one of my own. I grew up in an affluent neighborhood about 45 minutes away from a major city in the US. My neighborhood was a total bedroom community around 4,000 people, which means virtually no crime, aside from stupid rich kids driving around and hitting mailboxes with a baseball bat. I had much more sense early on because both of my parents worked hard and taught me the value of doing the same, along with other virtues like respect and just generally not being a total clown shoes arsehole to people. Anyway, for reference, this event happened when I was 12 in the late 90s. I'm a girl, and though I've since grown about 4 inches, I was 5'2" and probably barely 100 pounds. I've always been very athletic, playing multiple sports from the time I was mildly conscious because I have a good number of high-level athletes in my family, including my dad. My mum is from a major city and taught me the value of awareness of my surroundings early. All this will make sense in a moment.
She always told me to have my keys to our house out in my hands as soon as I got off the school bus to walk down my street home, though I never knew why. I'm so glad she always stressed this because I'm pretty certain it saved my life. So one day, I say bye to my friends and hop off the bus to take the short walk to my house. My street curves in a half circle, which makes it difficult to see around the curve, so basically you can only see a bit in front and behind as you walk. It's the least creepy street ever, neighbours all around with a comfortable distance between houses. As I am mindlessly walking around my curving street, I get a funny feeling that makes me turn and look behind me just as the crossing street is going out of my view. I see a man walking down the street that mine makes a T shape with, the one I was dropped off on. Weird, I think, as I've never seen him before, and not to say we knew everyone, but what struck me was that he wasn't really dressed like people around here. He was dressed fine in jeans and a polo, both of which were way too big. I shrugged and kept walking. But something was really bothering me about this guy. I was about to walk by my next neighbour's house, still pondering what was making me feel scared, when I looked back again. I figured I'd have to walk out into the street a bit to see where he went, but no. I had walked a fair distance, but this guy was suddenly no more than 10 feet from me. You always think in situations like this you'd scream or something, but my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't fathom how he'd gotten so close that fast, and his wide-eyed hyper-focused stare threw daggers into my stomach. I knew I was in big trouble, not wanting to find out what the fuck he wanted, who he was, or why he was gaining on me. I went directly into flight mode, knowing my house was about 100 yards away. I noped hard. I took off running across my driveway and realised he was running after me, because I heard his feet on the asphalt and then on my driveway. I know he was close, because I ran track, but I didn't waste time looking back. Realising my backpack, which probably weighed half of what I did, was slowing me down, I threw my arms back holding my keys in the death grip. I knew I could outrun him if I weren't so heavy and my backpack slipped off. I was able to gain distance on him, and I don't know if it was panic or adrenaline or whatever, but my front door keyhole became huge in my eyesight and I jammed my key in and got inside. I slammed my big ass oak door so hard that it recoiled, and half thinking about what could have happened if he got into my empty house, I slammed it closed and locked it. I stood there for a second, just wide-eyed and confused, until I realised I should look out of the peephole. When I did, it was pitch black. More confusion, it was 3 PM. I stood looking and staring to shake uncontrollably, and that's when I saw why it was black. Light started coming through as I saw this fucking creep's eye, and then him backing away from my door, having tried to look in. He was that close to me. He stood there for a moment, eyeballing my door and house, probably looking for another way in. Then, he started turning around on my porch to face the street, cursing under his breath. I could see him mouthing it, but I couldn't hear, partially because I'm sure I was in total shock. Then, he raises the creep factor to new heights. He skip walks off my porch, across my giant lawn to the street in the same direction we had been running, and raises his hand in the air. From behind my very tall pine trees on the right side of my vantage point, I see a white, windowless van pulling up in front, and he hops in. I can't see the driver because of the tinted windows in front, but they sat there, and I swear I could feel them looking at my door, maybe figuring out what to do next. They drove off and I slumped to the floor, shaking and freaking out so hard I legitimately had to crawl to my kitchen. I hid and called my mum, who despite working all the way downtown in the city, made the 45-minute drive home in 15. She drove around, ready to pull their spines out because although she's the kindest person I've ever known, she'll kick your ass. Or worse if you mess with me. We called the cops and I gave my statement, but they never found those freaks. This happened when I was about 7 years old in the 90s. I'm a guy to clarify. I had made a new friend who was a bit odd. Like, he would eat a live worm and chew on it, then open his mouth to show it wriggling around in pieces, and then eat it. Or remove a snail's shell without killing it, or eating the dehydrated flavouring from ramen noodle packets and saying it's spaceman food.
I invited him over my house to see my room and what stuff I did. But then he wanted to take me to his place, so I said I would get changed because it's really hot. Back then, I had a weird habit of wearing swimming trunks when it's hot. I guess it felt cooler than wearing shorts to me, although I didn't wear underwear because I figured you don't wear underwear when you're going swimming, so you don't wear them any other time you wore swimming trunks either. My friend noticed I was wearing swimming trunks and asked why, and I explained. I also said I wasn't wearing underwear because I thought it was funny. He looked shocked and wanted to know why. I explained, and he looked at me like I told him my dad was Hulk Hogan or something, and he wouldn't drop it the whole time we walked to his place. When we arrived, the house looked normal enough until we went inside. The smell hit me immediately. The stale, damp smell, combined with dog piss and shit. I also noticed there was no carpets and the floorboards were rotten. We head into the living room and it's full of people, 5 or so teenagers much older than us. I'm guessing his siblings, and I'm guessing their mother who was sat in the corner knitting. She was probably in her 50s. My friend introduced me and everyone kind of nodded in my direction. I noticed the girl trying to stuff a handful of cigarettes into her mouth and one of the boys lit them for her, and everyone was laughing when she choked after one puff. I was in shock because I was raised knowing kids are not allowed to smoke, so I immediately looked at the mother to see her reaction, but she didn't react. She just kept knitting while looking down. Next, my friend announces that I'm not wearing underwear, and the eldest boy, I'm guessing between 13 to 16, explodes with shock, excitement and says, "What? Show me!" I got scared and said I am wearing underwear, hoping they'd drop it, but they all got interested and cornered me and kept telling me to just pull them down so we can see. And then I said I want to go home, but they said no. And then he pulled out his Swiss Army knife and had this grin on his face. I looked at their mother thinking, isn't she going to tell them to stop? But she just kept knitting. My friend was supporting them, so I realized I had to rely on myself to get out of the situation. I looked around for a way to escape. One of them was blocking the door we came in. But I noticed there was another door leading further into the house, so I darted for it before anyone could get in front of it, hoping I'd find a back door. Thankfully, I did, and it was unlocked, and I exploded out of it, and they had a dog there that started barking at me. So I ran to the short chain link fence and pretty much leaped over it with all the adrenaline going through me, but none of them were chasing me. I never spoke to him or saw him after this.